Okay, to begin work on my Sickbay Playset, I've stripped down all of the parts that can come off pretty easily, so I could still pop out the railing. I'll do that in a minute. And then the next thing I'm going to do is come underneath. I'm going to pop all these screws out. I'll have to take the battery compartment apart as well and disconnect the wires that run up to the warp core. I forgot what it was called for a second. And get it all taken apart. I am going to be leaving this console where it's at. You'll see as we go forward. I'm trying to decide whether or not to deal with rewiring the light, because the speaker's down underneath. And I can easily leave the speaker attached, but the sound effects aren't going to make sense for a Sickbay, so I haven't really decided. Well, the red alert would work, but the engine startup noise would be weird for Sickbay. So yeah, that's the first part. I'm gonna get this apart and we'll see how it goes. So as I started taking this apart, I got to the, I took the batteries out and I started opening the wiring case underneath, and decided I should take a quick picture of the wiring just to make sure, in case. At the time I was thinking I might have decided to reuse the wiring and setup in order to install something for the lights and sound. The only issue is I don't know enough about those cards that they use for the sound effects to know how to reprogram it, because obviously I don't want an engineering sound in my Sickbay. But if you see the two little yellow wires there, those run up the that hole into the warp core and connect to the light bulb. That's the only thing that you really can't see in this picture. So I did that just for my own purposes, and if you decide that you want to try and wire it, you've got that same thing there. So the first thing I did, once I had everything cleared, and I do tape up all the parts that I didn't want to eventually paint as I was going. So I first took a piece of the plasticine board and measured and cut the curve to go in behind that console, and then I glued it down. I'm using just some painter's tape to hold it down while the glue takes hold. It only takes about 10 to 15 minutes for it to really get a hard set on it, but I was like, yeah, this is the easiest thing to do while I'm waiting for it to hold in place. And so yeah, then cut it down to the size and shape that I wanted. Cut that angled piece at the back, just to keep that support work the same way. It makes it give the room a cool shape. And then I started cutting and gluing on the sides along where those openings were, because I wanted it to be a solid piece. And eventually I will glue walls along the outside of all of this, but I did that so it would have sort of a double reinforcement and not give way underneath it. You can see that, I came all the way around the side. I did, if you see that little piece there that's sideways, that's because I apparently mismeasured by just a couple of millimeters and had a tiniest gap that was left there, so I had to take a little piece and shove it in sideways. Here I am. I just wanted to do, now that I had the floor itself in place, I wanted to do a test with the Triple Fiction Productions, their bed and cabinet, just to see how it would look, give me an idea, because I wasn't 100% sure on how I wanted it laid out. So this was going to start giving me some clearer ideas. I had certain things I knew I wanted, and here I am putting in the first wall I had measured, and got the height that I wanted and the width. And then I realized that because I did the width where it butts up against the plastic at the bottom, and I was like, oh man, this is going to leave a little gap. So I took and I cut another small piece and glued it into place, and the tape's just holding it until the glue sets there. To have it where it will actually match up with that wall and make a flush corner without a... Well, I mean, there's probably a tiny bit of a gap, but it's not as big of a gap. Then there's the back wall here. It does go all the way down to the bottom section. It's basically just a giant square of a piece. There's nothing special about this one. I did on the corner, I did on the left edge here, I did cut a slight bevel so that when I put the angled piece in, it would sort of butt up against it, but that didn't end up being the biggest help overall. You'll see later on I still had to use some filler. So I knew I wanted a little display table very similar to the one in the Dr. Crusher's Sickbay on the Enterprise D, and so I made this table. It's, you know, not exactly a match. It's intended to be sort of an homage of sorts. I just took and I glued up a couple of pieces here and there, and I cut these sort of D-shaped pieces. They're flat on the back and then curved on the front, and I made 3 large ones and 2 small ones in order to keep the gap, to have that gap between each layer. Then on the bottom, you'll see I actually measured a piece to help me distance the legs and square them up correctly on there. And here I am. This was actually, it wasn't in place yet. This was just me checking out how it would look if that's where I wanted to put it. And I was like, oh, you know, you could put the bed in this corner as well. So yeah, I was measuring that, and I loved the way it looked, and I glued that on right there. So then I wanted to check how other walls looked in place around it, and I got the warp core, and I'd had this idea beforehand that I wasn't sure about until I got everything taken apart, of taking the warp core and turning it into that round sort of scanner light that was above the Sickbay in the Next Generation Sickbay set. And I started realizing, you know, I could use the 2 little arms that are sticking off of it as the supports, and if I flip it upside down, then what was the top will be pointed down, and maybe the light will shine that direction. Which I ended up going a little bit different direction because I just didn't want to deal with trying to rewire right now until I can see if I can get some help from somebody on that soundboard, because like I said, I don't want engineering sounds. So this was me testing how it would kind of look, you know, aligned with the base, and I thought, okay, this is going to work. Now, one thing is that I was missing the little bridge piece above the main doorway to the right of the moon-shaped console. So I took the one from, I have an engineering set that's complete. I took it off and I used it as a guide for making another one completely out of the plastic. I glued it together, and boy, it was a lot of work. Some of those little pieces were quite fiddly. I didn't bother with trying to create the same trim effect. I wanted to have that arch in place so that it would go together correctly. Then I took and if you remember in the Next Generation, above one of the tables she had this, Dr. Crusher had this sort of computerized looking thing that they never touch it, they never used it, it was just a piece of background filler. This was actually 3 pieces that they were all the same squares. The one in the back was a completely solid piece. Then the one in the middle is where I cut that little hole. Then the one on the next one up, I cut the large hole, and I used the piece that I cut out of that. I sort of softened off the edges of it and used that as the piece on the top, extending out the top, so that it kind of mimics that computer thing. Eventually I do go in, and the only part that on the show that you could see was definitely any different was the little square was black, like maybe it was some kind of a screen going on. So here I am again testing with the triple fiction bed just to see how it's going to fit, how it's going to look. You can see that I've also gotten that corner piece put in, and yeah, there's some gap there, and that was when I decided that I would, before I got through, I was going to have to go in with the filler and fill in some of those gaps, so I wasn't too concerned about it. And this is, the wall's not put in place yet. This was just me testing the wall on the left side and mainly starting to try and figure out where I wanted to put the screen. And at this point I hadn't printed up the picture I was going to use yet. I knew the approximate size I was going for, and so I just kind of used a pencil to sketch that on there because I knew I needed it to be a certain distance from that wall, and that kind of thing. I then did go ahead and bevel that corner of the wall again just to try and get it to fit up as flush as I could, but it wasn't perfect, but it worked. So yeah, I did get the hole in the wall cut, and I got it glued up on that left side. And then you see all of that pink stuff is the filler. Same stuff that you can buy at Home Depot or Lowe's or any hardware store, that it goes on pink and dries white. And obviously you can tell for the hole in of where the screen is that I had gotten the piece printed and figured out and measured how big that I was going to want that hole to be so that it could be recessed just a little bit into that wall. As you can see, quite a bit smaller than the original thing I had drawn. It is pretty close to the line on the bottom I drew. And what I did is I took the picture. It's actually just printed on regular office paper. I took a piece of clear plastic like you would get out of a food packaging container, cleaned it up real good, and glued it on top. Put the same kind of plasticine underneath at the back that I've been using for everything else. And then I took 2 pieces of cardboard, just like you'd get from any box that stuff is shipped in, and cut the holes into the middle of them and glued them on top of that. And then I took the plastic and made a box all the way around it so that it would protect it. And I painted... I did use the same Bondo filler, wall filler, to kind of clean up the edge just to make sure it was smooth around it. And then I took some brown and painted the inner rim because I was going to be, I didn't want to have this getting painted when I started spray painting the whole thing. So I took and painted it with just some regular brown paint. Which, if you look at the one on the Next Generation, it's just got this sort of blob brown trim around that whole edge. So here I am doing just another test fit, checking to see how things are going to look if they're put in place in this position. And I'm really liking the way that the view screen looks there. It's not glued in yet. It's just kind of sitting there. And got a few pieces in place. And checking again how is it going to look lined up with the warp core as the light. I haven't done anything to it really to manipulate it yet as far as that goes. So the next thing to do was to prime it and paint it and get it going. Okay, so for the Sickbay set, this is where I am at. The very next step is going to be painting it with a base coat, a primer. So you will see this is going to be the little screen here. I'll show you. It'll sit right behind there. I don't want to get this side painted, so I'll be taking with the primer. So I'll just be taking and keeping it face down and just painting the back side. And then gluing this on when everything comes together. But yeah, this is, and I've taped off all of the sections here. This is that piece that I had to make to replace the archway over here. It's a little loose. I'm probably going to take and glue it in place as I get closer to finishing. And this is, so you know, in Sickbay there was that, above the biobed, there was the large round device that they would have. Well, I took the engineering core, and what I did was I put a piece of Velcro in, and yeah, I decided not to bother with trying to rewire, and that way I can take and just put that back together. And you can't really see it right now, but the light is shining down through there. I might try and find some brighter tea light candle type things later on, but I'm going to leave this where I can take it apart easily. Let me show you how I made this assembly. So this part comes off real easy. This part you kind of have to wiggle just a hair because I made it a pretty tight fit. So I've got two little posts sticking up on either side, and I have made, hopefully you can see, the little slot that is literally just the size of those pieces on both of those, so that it can slide down like that and like that. There we go. And it holds in place. And then of course this part has all these little prongs that go down, and I can, if I wanted to, reattach these screws that connect here. After I paint this, I am going to be getting a piece of transparent plastic and gluing it in at the bottom right here to sort of give it that opaque look. And I have taken and glued the door of what was the warp core closed so that it doesn't wiggle around. And so yeah, that fits like that, and that's actually kind of a cool view of that angle. I haven't really paid attention to it. So yeah, the wall comes around like this, and you've got this nice sick bay. I'm trying to see if I can figure out some decals of some sort to replace most of the ones that are under here that I've taped off. And of course there's that table over there that I built. This is all out of the plastic that I glued together with the plastic glue. That's Tamiya plastic cement. And I will real quick show you that I've got a couple of leftover pieces. There's this piece of the warp core here that I'm thinking I might use. I'm thinking about building another playset that'll be sort of a science lab. And then I've got these two warp core, God, I can't remember what these things are called. They transfer the intermix to the warp nacelles. I'm still trying to kind of figure out, I might have to get something that dissolves the glue on these to pull these apart, because they are put together really well. So yeah, that is where I am at on the Sickbay Playset. So I'm going to get this painted up, and we'll see how it goes from there. Alright everybody, we are now at the final stage. As you can see, I've got Dr. Bashir here. He's got a patient who's waiting, so they need an operating room. So let's set them off to the side. And as you can see, we have finished the paint job. I've got it all done in beige with some gray trim. Let me flip it around here. You can see on the back side of that console as well. A little black screen up there. We've got the window piece in, and we'll pop in
that wall there, and this wall here still has the little drop down. And then let's get this wall popped into place. I guess because of the paint, it's having a hard time seating in there. There we go. And then there's the replacement piece that I made, which is probably, I'm going to probably have to take and just put the tiniest dab of glue on to get it to hold semi-permanently. It'll pop off. And now our Sickbay, oh wait, nope, it's not quite done. We've got the lighting fixture. This is the old warp core I took, and I've got a T-light which I can turn on right here, and I did make a hole so that I can kind of align the light with that hole and maybe use a pin to reach in and turn that on and off. And now spin this around and we will slide this onto these little fixtures. Well, all that's left is to decorate the room. Let's get a medical bed, maybe get a few pieces of equipment over there. We've got the little rolling cabinet. We can stick that in that corner. We've got, and then we can put our patient into place. Drop the little, well, let me see. He's being a little difficult there. There we go. And we can have the bed either aligned like this, and then put Dr. Bashir right there, and there we go. That is my finished surgical suite for my Playmates Star Trek figures. Let me get the camera and we'll get some close-up shots in here. I do still want to get some stickers and replace, especially like that one there. That's got this, that as an obvious engineering console. But I'll be working on that soon. But yeah, you can see the little display that I made that Bashir could look at the patient's stats and whatever. I think it came out pretty good. Well, I might take and post a few more beauty shots here at the end, but that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the process of seeing how I made this, and I'll see you next time.